Well, happy Friday to all of you here in the chapel or out on Zoom. And of course, those of you who might watch later on video, we are concluding today our study this week, our leadership Bible study of Jethro and the law of intuition. And as you know, on Fridays, we change focus and look to really deal more with application of what we have studied on the 4 previous days of the week. And so, as I said, we have been addressing the issue of the law of intuition. And as we pointed out, and I'll just give one more reminder, intuitive leaders, they sense what's happening among their people, and they instantly know, or almost instantly know anyway, their hopes, fears, and concerns. And again, it's that internal knowledge and awareness. That's what we mean by intuition. And so to kind of summarize then where we've been this week, we've spent the last 4 days discussing Jethro and the law of intuition. So Jethro used his gift of intuition to come alongside of Moses and help him become a better leader. Now, he did that in 2 ways. First, he used his intuition to diagnose that Moses was headed for trouble. We don't really know at the present time how much trouble he was in. All the text tells us in Exodus 18 is that the people stood all day long and basically until the evening hours, and again, they were in a desert, in order to have Moses hear their situations and give them some verdict. And so what Jethro was able to discern in the first place was that if Moses didn't have a problem now, he was going to have one very soon. And to be honest, it probably is clear, and I would say very safe to assume that Moses already had a problem, but maybe he didn't realize it. So first, Jethro then says, you have a problem on your hands. Now, fortunately, Jethro wasn't like a lot of people who are very good at pointing out problems and not so good about pointing out solutions. We all have had people like that in our lives, but Jethro not only uses intuition to identify a potential problem, but also to suggest a very helpful solution. And so we find that as we read through that text in Exodus chapter 18, Moses, in fact, adopted the proposal. And then Jethro left, knowing that everything was in good hands. Moses let him leave. And then it turns out that as a result of that very suggestion, Moses was able to endure. A whole new generation of leaders were identified and appointed and then released, given authority to do their work, and the people went home with their needs met. And so that gift of intuition on Jethro's part turned out to be a huge blessing and a huge win all the way around. And so as we walk back then and look at our 4 leadership thoughts in the section that on Friday we refer to as taking it in. First, we talked about on Monday, who you are is what you see. And what we discussed then was that everyone is intuitive in their area of strength or giftedness. So as we pointed out then, people who are merciful, well, they will tend to look at everybody from a standpoint of mercy. Or people who are very service-minded will just be able to not only know when a person's in need, but have a sense for what can be done about that need. Then on Tuesday, we addressed the question that intuitive leaders are readers. And while that might involve books and literature and things like that, we really pointed out that it went way beyond literature, but that leaders read situations. They read trends. They read their resources. They read people. And of course, they read themselves. So they take time to reflect and to think and just be aware of everything around them. Then on Wednesday, we looked at the issue that a leader's intuition adds value to other people. Jethro, of course, being a shining example of that. Because at the end of the day, Jethro didn't win any kind of award for what he did. He didn't get an Oscar. He didn't get a Grammy. He didn't get anything other than thank you. And so in a sense, you might say that what Jethro did was completely for the benefit of other people. Now, I'm sure at the end of the day, he probably felt a certain sense of significance because he knew that God had used him to cause a tremendous benefit to other people. And that is certainly not to be minimized. But just on the surface of things, what he did really added value to Moses. It added value to these new leaders and added value to the people. Then finally on Thursday, we offered what I hope you would think to be a word of encouragement yesterday, that wherever you think your leadership intuition is right now, you can grow in that. It's not something that you're stuck at. It's not something that you can say, well, I just kind of stink at that, and so I'm always going to stink at that. No, we talked about some ways that Moses grew, and we pointed out really all week long that Jethro was more natural in this area than Moses was. But we ended yesterday talking about how Moses, not only does leadership in general increase, but Moses, his intuition increased as well. Because we find that as his time is coming to a close, he asked God to raise up a new leader to replace him. And Moses was smart enough to know that because Israel was going to have to go to war in order to take possession of the promised land, it wasn't going to just be handed to them. They were going to have to fight for it. That it was very important for a military leader to be put in charge of the people of Israel. And of course, it turns out that not only was Joshua that military leader, but Joshua was the one who had spent 40 years learning directly from Moses. And so we see that indeed Moses' intuition grew as time went on. And so the good news is your intuition can grow as well. So we take time every Friday in a segment called Praying It Through. And we just kind of put the summary of what we've looked at and kind of phrase it and put it in the form of a prayer. So I'll invite you to just bow your heads and your hearts for just a brief word of prayer. Dear God, the psalmist prayed, teach me good judgment and knowledge, for I believe your commandments. I make that same request. Help me to increase my leadership ability and hone my intuition. And may I exercise good judgment for the benefit of the people you've placed in my care. Amen. So now we get to the part on Friday where we really focus our attention on how do we live out and implement these principles. So Monday through Thursday is all about principles, and Friday then is when we suggest some ways, some practical ways that we can move forward in whatever it is that we're studying that week. And so in terms of living it out, the first thing that comes to mind here is to learn all you can about leadership. Because intuition has got to be based on a foundation of understanding. So you just don't want to go out willy-nilly and just, I know this or I know that. Ideally, there's a certain level, foundation, if you will. Think of a house and the foundation. There has to be that level of understanding. And then you begin to have confidence in that, and you begin to then just process things differently when you have that level of understanding. So start there, learn everything you can, whether that's books, tapes, people, watching people. In fact, that actually leads to the second point. Do you know an intuitive leader? Do you know someone or even suspect somebody operates in intuition and is in a place of leadership? If you do, then the best thing you can do, if it's possible, is try to spend some time with them. And when you're with them, just observe. Just take some time and shadow them, or just kind of how did you get there? And oftentimes it's okay to ask some questions. Say, maybe they made a certain decision, and you simply said, what was the criteria that you used to make that decision? And then as you learn how they process things, it doesn't mean that you'll do it identically to theirs, but at least you can be informed by how they do things and how they arrive at decisions. Third, while we certainly want to emphasize the principle of learning, that's a very good thing. But it's not just academics that we're talking about. We're talking about putting this into practice. So yes, study, yes, observe, yes, learn everything you can. But then once you've learned some stuff, try it out. Try it out. Don't worry about whether it's going to fail or not, at least initially, especially. Just try it out, because really at the end of the day, you'll learn far more by doing and maybe even by making some mistakes along the way. But the idea is you get all the knowledge you can, and then try some stuff out. Make your own observations. Be a student of yourself. See what works, see what doesn't work. Try to figure out why. Then finally, this is important. If you're a perfectionist, you got to be careful, because when you're trying on something new, you're going to make mistakes. I can certainly remember first time I learned to play golf, and believe me, I'm still learning. But boy, that thing would go sideways. Getting it to go straight, about the best way I can make it to go straight is if I rolled it down the fairway. And even then, it might sometimes go offline. But eventually, when I started paying attention and I started noticing some patterns, then I could learn. And then, of course, I would also seek advice from people who were better and who could instantly see what I was doing wrong. But boy, if I would have been crippled by every mistake I made on the golf course, I'd never play. And life, I think, works that way. We can't be afraid of making mistakes. Now, here's the key. You don't get better by trying and failing. You get better by trying, failing, and learning. So you ask yourself that key question: what did I learn from this experience? Good or bad? What do I take away from it? That's the key to growing, so that we don't make the same mistakes over and over again. I don't have any issues with making mistakes, but I have significant issues with making the same mistakes over and over and over again, because that means I didn't learn. So the key is make mistakes, but learn from them so you don't keep making them. All right. Our kind of a reminder, really, what we always give every Friday, I call it passing it on. And that just simply says, what concept, thought, idea, or practice that you may have unpacked while we've been together this week. Maybe you've learned something that you think, hey, this was really valuable to me. I found this really helpful. Well, maybe there's someone else that might also be blessed, and they might be blessed by something different than what blessed you, and that's okay. But the idea is, let's pass on whatever it is that we gain from this time together and share it with someone else. So I like to put it in this term: what have you learned this week that you will pass on to someone else in the next few days? Notice the kind of that time frame in there. It helps us. That time frame helps us kind of put things into action instead of just intentions. All right. Well, maybe you are now curious, because we're at the point of giving a little blurb, little promo for next week. So next week, I can't wait for next week. We're gonna be talking about the leadership law of magnetism. So think of a magnet. Well, it just simply says who you are is who you attract. It's kind of a natural thing. And we're going to be looking at a very, very interesting biblical character, and that is Elijah. For those, if you know who Elijah was, he was one of the greatest prophets in the Old Testament. Had some very interesting stories about Elijah, and so I just invite you to really jump in, read the stories. I'll give you the Bible passages that we're looking at for our foundation. That's 1 Kings 16, 29 through 17:24. And then chapter 18, 20 through 46, chapter 19, 11 through 21. Then we jump over into 2 Kings. And there we're going to look at the first chapter, 1:1, the entire chapter, and then all the way through chapter 2, verse 25. And then finally, 2 Kings chapter 4, all 37 verses there. So with that, we, as always, wish you a great weekend, and come back Monday ready to roll with Elijah and the law of magnetism. I think that'll be a great week ahead of us. So God bless you. Thank you for being with us, not just today, but throughout the week. And we trust that this week has been a blessing for you, and I'm anticipating a great week next week. God bless you all, and we look forward to seeing you back on Monday.